with answering those who asked in the chat. Should by any chance we're not able to answer all the questions by the end of this broadcast, no worries. The remaining unanswered questions will be answered by the appropriate experts and be provided in a follow-up email. All right, so let's kick off the SoilPalooza event and watch this awesome video by, it's at the Debs Park Tour, showing some really cool windrows. Take it away, Janelle.
Hey everybody, welcome to Debs Park. We are LA Compost. This is one of our regional hubs. LA Compost is a nonprofit that's based in LA, as you guys might guess. We do community and regional composting. We have over 35 hubs, I believe, all throughout LA County. So it's a decentralized network. We have different compost managers that actually live in those regions, that manage the site in those regions. LA Compost programming is kind of broken up into 3 areas. We focus on the individual, and that's in the form of drop-off opportunities, workshops, and educational programming. We also focus on the community, so that's going to be in our community hubs. We also have a co-op model. The co-op model is essentially you register to be a part of that co-op, you contribute to 1 volunteer event per year, and then you get a little bit of compost 2 or 3 times a year, depending on how much that hub produces. We actually have these contact-free drop-offs, kind of like a farmer's market style, where people come, they drop off their produce that they've been storing, their kitchen scraps for the last week or whatever, and then those materials get brought less than 5 miles away to this location, and we process them in large amounts, and we build these compost windrows.
We build our piles here at the beginning, and as you can see, we have 2 active windrows. And the idea is that the farther back they are, the more times they've been turned. After they reach the end of the pile, then they go off to one of our curing areas, which there's some right next to the sifted compost. And then we have 2 more areas back here. This back area is where we're actually sifting right now.
So what we're going to do is actually right here where you're all standing. So if you all take a little bit of step back, we're going to build our compost pile right here. Okay. We've already put down a nice little base of mulch that's about 2 to 3 inches thick. We've actually watered a bunch of it, so it's already kind of wet already, so it doesn't dry out our piles. So what we're going to do next is put down the food scraps. And we'll do it, we usually do is about 3 bins wide and about 4 bins long. One of the great things about getting food scraps from about 300 different Angelinos is we get a lot of different types of food. So we try to make it just also level, but just to make sure we're getting a close contact between our nitrogen and our carbon sources, right? So the bacteria have access to both. We just try to make a very thin layer.
What about all the citrus?
All the citrus is fine because our piles are so large. If we had a smaller windrow, I probably wouldn't use so much citrus. But the bacteria that get killed off by the extras, the acids that are in the citrus, you can see our pile, bigger our piles are. There's just enough bacteria that will be replaced within a day, right? So we're going to lose some of our bacteria, some of our fungus, but they'll be replaced really quickly. Okay, that looks good. Hold that. Yep. Thank you. So now we're going to start with our mixture of different type of mulches. So we have some leaves, some food scrap. We'll spread these out about a 3-inch layer. So it's probably going to be about 6 of these. Or 70, sorry. We're going to actually save that one for the second trip. Just because these 2 are bacteria. You can grab one of those mulch ones, though. Just take the rakes out. If you want to, guys, yeah, just grab one and start spreading it around. Thank you very much. So now I'd actually add a little thin layer of the manure, and then we're gonna add another layer of just the sawdust for this trip. This one, go ahead. Hey, oops, sorry.
Sorry.
That's okay. We're just gonna toss this one around. There we go. You just wanna rake that out a little bit? Yeah, so we put the same thing. I don't want to make too much. I just want a little dusting of it. We found if we put 2 or 3 on, then it really stops the penetration of the moisture and stops the air from the circulation. I usually put 1 bucket or 2 buckets of inoculant and 1 bucket of sawdust, and that's it. We would finish by doing this whole thing over again. On a typical Tuesday, we'll do 3,500 pounds to over 6,000 pounds in 2 hours. And that includes moving one of these piles again. So we first start off by we get a couple of people start to build the piles. We have a couple of people start using a pitchfork to turn the last week's pile. And at the same point, we're always getting them wet again. We're building them back up again. But it's also just to keep the bacteria active and not getting too hot in one spot and cold in another spot. We want to mix it all together to make sure it's evenly cooking all the way through the system. And for us, then the piles will usually sit, partly because we don't have enough don't have enough people and volunteers, but they'll sit for about a month, and then we'll go through the whole process of moving a pile again. So this one, when we turn this one, will actually be, by the time we're ready to move this one next week, we'll actually just take a foot of it, like we'll start right here, and we'll just turn it right here. That's why we always live at a foot or 2 right here, and we'll just turn the whole thing just 1 foot over. So it doesn't take us to pick it up and move it somewhere, and then we'll actually probably at that point also double the height, just to keep the heat locked in, but it also just takes up a lot less space.
At this area, we're going to be doing a little bit of turning, and we're going to talk about the importance of turning your compost pile. It sounds like a lot of you guys are experienced windrow builders and maintainers, so a lot of this might be review. But turning the compost pile is essential to the maintenance and just best management practices of maintaining a windrow. I don't know how many of you guys deal with kind of 3 bins or small systems like a pallet type of system. We also turn those. It's equally important. But we manage windrow sites here, so that's what we're going to show you. We obviously build large piles. Our general process is after a week. Week 1, we build the pile. That following Tuesday, we come back and we turn the pile. Another super important part, 4 ingredients of compost. I know we've talked about this a lot. Carbon, nitrogen. Other 2 are?
Water and air.
Air and water. We got it. So when we turn the pile, we're reintroducing oxygen. We're ensuring that the compost pile doesn't go anaerobic. As you can imagine, with all of that mass and all of that weight, it's possible for those kind of air pore spaces to fill in. So turning it is just essential to make sure that we're maintaining aerobic conditions. Last, most important thing, kind of mentioned it, but we want to make sure that all the materials that are on the outside are able to make it into the inside. So it's kind of like a flipping it inside out kind of thing. You can envision the inside is like an oven, so all of those things are getting cooked, but then you have the areas on the outside that are not quite as hot. So we want to make sure that those go in the inside and can cook as well. So our basic process, like Mario was describing when we first got here, we build our piles on that side, and then every week we turn them, slowly making it over here. This is an example of one of our curing piles. The top is very dry, but you can see on the inside, it's super moist, pretty much all broken down. And this pile is almost there, but it's gonna get turned one more time, and then it's gonna get moved over here in about a month to sit for another month. At our sites, we do a lot of curing so that we make sure to stabilize all the microbial populations and also encourage the growth of fungi. When you let the compost cure for longer and continue to water it, it really encourages the fungal growth. And the fungi don't like to live as much in the super hot temperatures. So as those temperatures drop, that's when you get a lot of fungal life, mycelium, which you might see somewhere on these little sticks. So standard process, take a scoop, throw a scoop. What we're doing, like we mentioned, is incorporating oxygen, ensuring it doesn't go anaerobic. Somebody can also grab the hose during this process. I can at the end, or somebody else can. And we want to water it while we're doing it to make sure that everything's getting nice and wet.
As we're turning it?
Yes,
Oh,
as, during, I'll show you. So if you guys, so when we do it in a big group, it can be a little easier to kind of have a little assembly line. So yeah, kind of step back a little bit to where it starts, and then you can do that too. I'm gonna grab yours for a second to demo it, and then I'm gonna hand it back to you. So basically, take a scoop, throw it that way. What we're doing, once you guys start getting into this, you'll see how dense it is in the center. This pile is a lot more mature, so it's not as steamy as when we often turn our piles. There's a little bit of steam. And you can also see as you get down in here, here is that actinobacteria in small amounts. It gets a little denser as we go in. But we're just gonna start turning it. The goal is to get it on top of itself. And it's super moist at the bottom. So if you guys wanna come check this out, or not everybody, but some people can, I think like using your senses is important. This actually doesn't smell that bad, but if you just look at it, you can kind of see it's almost like muddy. That's what we want to avoid. So, all right, turners, you ready? Take a scoop, throw a scoop. I'm gonna give this back to you.
I was just adding it to my notes.
You're good. Yes, perfect. So just kind of aim it towards that pile. Where is your citrus? Maybe I'll come. So you're ready for this.
We're digging you out. You're trying to topple me from my throne. What is that?
What is it? I don't know. It's like that. I'm pretty sure it's like that fungus. It's almost like hair forming.
It looks like
Wow.
fungus, yeah.
You got a big chunk there.
So whatever it is, it's colonizing all these wood chips.
You wanna look?
Who wants to pitch?
Let's see. Show me here. Like, look at that's all that. I'm pretty sure that's all that fungus.
What does it smell like?
Smells
Like earth.
yeah like earth.
It's a gold mine right there. All that water.
We build the pile, we turn it once, in the first week is super important. And then typically we turn it about 5 more times until it gets to where it's at now, which is like nearly curing, and then this is gonna be our last time. So 5 to 6 times in a 4-month period, and then it sits for about another month without getting turned again. And we've played around a lot with these recipes, and like, I'm in the school of thought that there's a million ways to do everything. There's some like benchmarks that we want to hit, like we want to make sure that we keep the piles hot for a certain amount of time, but I think it's important too to like learn your own recipe, learn your own conditions, like learn your community and what they're bringing, how often you can turn it. Maybe you're lucky enough to have machinery. Maybe you can turn it all the time. So I think every site's different, and we definitely do lean on a kind of longer process than a lot of people.
So you could change the speed that you want. You could change the grate. You can. It's at an eighth. It's at a 1/4 inch right now. You can get it to an 1/8 inch, which will get it even more fine, or a 1/4 inch if you want more to fall through. And we kind of just use this resting bar here to allow the material that needs to be sifted to kind of go through. And it's a shared resource, so then we just take it to different parts of the city each month. Each month a certain region will have it and can sift their entire windrow in a 1/4 of the time it would take 3 staff members to do so. Do it.
Then after it gets sifted, what about all the material that's still solid? Does it stay out?
So all that stuff we call our overs still has a lot of microbial activity. We'll use that almost like a sourdough starter, and that'll just be re-inoculated into our fresh piles to add that life and biology that's present on the surface level of it. So although it's still a carbon, it doesn't have as much readily available carbon as like fresh mulch and fresh wood chips, but it has a ton of microbial life and activity to re-inoculate in our fresh piles. We still do the hand sifters. If you got a strong community of volunteers, students, interns, still a great bonding activity, but as we grow and as we scale, it's nice to have shared infrastructure to be able to move around the city as well.
Thank you guys.
Oh shit, we gotta walk.
Love you guys.
Can we run?
Bye.
Good job, Cooney.
Yeah, no, we'll talk soon. I'll see you on Thursday. Bye, everybody.
Awesome. What a beautiful video. I'm smiling pretty hard right now. Okay, so next up we actually have thermophilic composting by Keisha of Catalyst Bioamendments. So let's check that out and get a little bit of a different composting perspective.
Hi, my name is Keisha Ernst, and I'm one of the owners at Catalyst Bioamendments. We are a small-scale, mid-scale compost production facility in Northern California. We've been in production now for 5 years, and when we started, composting wasn't necessarily our goal. We wanted to be soil food web consultants. We wanted to work with farmers, ranchers, at-home gardeners, and other compost producers to help them create ecosystems within their soil, within their products, that are quite diverse and I guess you could say interesting to look at underneath a microscope. We didn't, like I said, we didn't necessarily want to produce compost, but the hand-turned piles that we were making at home just weren't, it just wasn't enough for the scale of work that we were trying to do. And so our compost lot where we work, although I like to use all types of composting, static, vermicomposting, all of that, we found that thermophilic composting was the best way for us to grow the microorganisms we need and to do it in a timely fashion. So I've been asked to come here today to talk to you about thermophilic compost and why you might choose that for your operation over other methodologies that are available. Now, let's see. There's a lot of reasons why we like thermophilic. I will say that it is hard to get a permit for thermophilic composting. I'll just start with the hard part, especially in California. At scale, if you're going to sell the product, it is difficult to be able to get permissions to heat it up. But if you can, I feel like it is a really good option. And especially if you're composting at home, composting food waste, composting on a community level, I think thermophilic can be a great option because you probably don't need a permit. So our compost, we're looking for something a little bit different than your typical facility. We really want every single bag of compost that comes off of our lot to be able to put underneath a microscope and to be able to see lots of diverse microorganisms. And that's, we use our data collection to guide our processes to make sure that this is a truth for us. So when we look under the microscope, we're going to see fungi, we're going to see bacteria, we're going to see lots of predatory organisms like amoeba and flagellates. We're also going to see nematodes, all different kinds of nematodes thriving there. So what we want is when we're looking, through our microscope, we want to see a thriving community with our eyes every single time we look. And so a big thing here is timing, right? So, static composting can take a long time, maybe even up to a year and a half. Thermophilic composting is actually very, very quick. From the moment that we build our piles, that heat that's generated by the microorganisms splitting, it breaks down the materials quite quickly. So when you're looking at this picture right here of this window that was just built, it's brand new, it's never been turned before, and you can clearly see the grass, you can see the manure, you can see the wood chips. within one turn, which might happen within 24 to 48 hours, it's already starting to look like compost. By turn 3, it looks very much like compost. And then as we finish up our regulation turns, finish out that temperature, if we're lucky, it's just a few weeks of turning and really, really strenuous monitoring. So every day we're going to come in, we're going to look in the morning. Sometimes we even look in the afternoon or the evening to see where our temperatures are at, and making sure that we're turning at the exact right time. Now, a lot of times, the idea is to make compost as fast as you can so you can sell it as quickly as possible. So, if you're starting a compost lot and that's your goal, is to get your materials in and get them off the lot and sold quickly, I still would say thermophilic is the best option. For us, we like to get it all done at once and then just be spending the rest of the year babysitting, a massive amount of compost by watering it, checking it with a microscope. For us, that's the easiest way. But even in a typical high production fashion where you're trying to get it in and get it out, I think that's why thermophilic is often chosen as the means to do that type of composting. There's other things to consider too, besides just how fast it is to move it on and off your lot. Composting, if you're composting static and you've ever had, an at-home food waste pile and you put those pumpkin scraps in the fall, whether you want them to or not, in the spring, you're usually going to see a nice little pumpkin patch growing out of your compost pile. And so, whether we're talking about weed seeds or, seeds of the crop that we've just grown, typically we don't want to see those kinds of plants growing in a compost that we're selling to someone. When someone buys our compost, we really want them to be able to take it home, put it in their garden, bury it into their soil, and not worry about some sort of unwanted pest or even food seed or flower seed popping up in that compost. So when we're holding the compost at a high temperature for that many days, it is actually cooking off those seeds and killing them, while still maintaining an environment where the microorganisms can thrive. Now, another thing that we want to look at is pathogen. So when we're talking about food scraps, manure, literally any organic material could have, plant pathogen or human pathogen on it. And so, when we're using vermicomposting, when we're using static composting, those pathogens will get dealt with eventually, but it takes a lot of time, like I mentioned before. With this kind of heat, we're going to be killing off all those human pathogens, all those plant pathogens, and kind of resetting a stage for the microorganisms that we want to grow to come back very quickly. When the temperatures are quite high, there's a lot of bacterial growth going on, but maybe not so much of the fungal growth and, seeing those predatory organisms and nematodes growing. So we want the temperature to go from high down to low and to actually ambient as quickly as possible. Because at that point, we've dealt with our seeds, we've dealt with our pathogens, and we're, able to move that compost out the door, or at least start investing in following it and its life with our microscope. Now you might be wondering, how does this heat work? How is it killing, just the pathogens? And that answer is, I find it to be quite interesting that pathogenic organisms are planning on living their life out inside a host. So they don't have these incredibly strong structures that will withstand things like this high intensity heat. Where a lot of these other microorganisms, they are free living, they're out in the soil, they're moving around every day in a wild environment. They're evading predators, they're having to capture their own food. They need to really invest in their own structure so that they can make it, out into the wild, out in the compost pile, so to speak, long enough to reproduce and to, continue their lives. And so that is why that heat is going to take these, the bad guys, so to speak, or the organisms that we really just don't want to see pressure from in our crops or pressure from in our bodies. That's why we can see them disappear so quickly. Now, again, like I want to remind you that there are lots of ways to grow microorganisms. There are a lot of ways to compost. And not everybody that's out there composting is trying to make a product that's exactly like ours. For you, the mission might be to just divert as much organic material from the landfill as possible. And so, you know, when we're doing that, still, I think all of these ideas are kind of pointing towards your case, right? Like if you want to take, you know, thousands and thousands of pounds of food waste and turn it into a safe organic material that can be used by farmers, and you want to do it really quickly, thermophilic compost is going to be it. I don't know if you've ever had, and maybe perhaps you have had the opportunity of having a big pile of food waste near your house. Even if you cover it with wood chips and you buffer it, you're going to see the critters start to come in. You know, you're going to see the rats, you're going to see the crows, you know, all kinds of birds and animals are going to come in to try to get that food resource. And, you know, that's also something that we're not necessarily wanting on our compost lot. And so, you know, this is a way, if you can imagine, you know, the compost pile is going to get so hot within 48 to 72 hours that that food gets cooked. And then, like I said, on turn 2 or 3, it actually already looks like compost. So, you know, if you can imagine a watermelon going from a watermelon into a bag of compost in just a couple months, I think that that's useful for anyone who's trying to work with organic materials. All right, thanks so much for tuning in. Bye-bye.
Awesome. That was a great video on thermophilic and great reasons on why to use it. So let's take a quick Q&A break. So again, if you would like to answer questions, go ahead and raise your hand. I'm using the raise hand feature below, and Janelle will be calling on people that raise their hand. If you haven't, or if you'd like to also, you can use the chat feature below and ask your questions that way.
I just wanted to point out as well, you may have seen it in the images that Keisha showed in that video. We kind of showed 2 different scales of windrow type composting. So LA Compost video, you know, they've got a lot of community members involved. It's part of their model. So they're hand turning their windrows. Yes, hopefully team lifting, as Lee mentioned in the chat, because those totes do get real heavy. But Catalyst actually has scaled up from that, and they had a big, beautiful mechanized windrow turner that they hook up to their tractor. So just kind of showing folks different scales and different uses and things to consider when you're selecting the type of composting you might want to do. All right, any questions? Any takers? So for all the heights, David, I'm not entirely sure. However, I think there is a fairly generic recipe that people like to use when they're doing food waste composting. It's 4 parts browns, 3 parts green, which that would be your food waste, and 1 part manure if you choose to use manure in your piles. So it's more a ratio, and I'm sure you could break that down to the heights of how things are stacked in your piles. And Courtney's put it in the chat for us as well. Vera's asking about the hand-turned windrows. So I think what they were trying to describe in the video is how the outside of your compost pile, if you choose a pile method or a windrow method, One of the reasons you want to turn it is to make sure that every single part of your pile has ended up in the hot center, because that's where everything gets cooked. That's where, like Keisha was saying in the video, you're going to kill off weed seeds and pathogens and things like that is in the hot part. But the entire pile is not hot all at once. So by turning it, you give all the different parts of the pile a chance to be kind of folded into the center. So in Dr. Elaine Ingham's type training, there's a very specific way to do this. And I think with a lot of our systems, we just make sure that we turn it enough times, maybe not only 3 times. We try to turn it a few more times just to make sure all of that pile has had a chance to heat up and be in the inside. So Vera, yes, I think they're turning those windrows more than just 2 or 3 times to try to ensure that all of it's getting heated up. Okay. Shall we move on? I think our next video is a 3-bin system.
Yeah, I think so, if we don't have any more questions. So the next video, again, we got Carver Middle School. We got a site visit featuring a 3-bin system and a little bit of vermicomposting with Courtney Brown included in the video. It's gonna be really cool.
Hello, y'all. Welcome to South Central LA. This is George Washington Carver Middle School. This community is very rich with both Latin and Black community members. And this space is powerful because it's actually one of few of the green spaces that we have in South LA. I've been in this space for the last 3 years. I've been welcomed as one of the first community members in this space. Been lucky enough to develop partnerships with existing organizations that are here now, which is Route 10 LA and LA Compost. And we're here to work along the school to provide services for the students. I love to always tell the students that this is their garden, and we're certainly here to maintain it. So that's I express that to all the community members as well. All right, yeah, let's go. We're here to talk about the 3-bin system that we have. It's a system that we use. It's really nice. To be honest, it's really expensive too. So it's not one of my favorite places or ways to compost just because of the cost. But it's worth it. It's a very beautiful structure. It's used very well for what it needs to be used for. If you guys see here, we have food scraps actually filled up all the way to the top. And this is actually our open bin. So this is the bin where the food scraps are being collected and accumulated. This here tension string is very important, and I'll show you my mistake. This is a big thing that happens if there's not enough tension that's being holding the wire. The food scraps tend to throw out their weight. So this here, there's some wiggle room. And it happens that these guys tend to fall out when there's wiggle room. So we'd always want to have this tension wire tight, especially when there's food scraps. It's very important. A lot of people ask why this is important. Let me just explain to you. Holds in the tension from going out and warping out. If you don't, you have slabs are sticking out like that. Very importantly, when we started this bin, we had to level the ground. It was graded. It's very important to have it being graded as best as you can, because if you don't with time and the weight, it tends to warp to one side and then sink down. You have uneven pile, then you have the bin kind of warping and kind of falling apart with time. So you always want to make sure that you always have a level platform that you're putting this on top of it. We actually use pavers. We use about 48 pavers for the area. underneath the bin, and it fits pretty good. So this bin is actually designed to take about 12,000 pounds of food each chamber. So this one, of course, more or less, you can also take into account that food scraps tend to break down, and you can add more, so you can add more than 12,000. I've gotten away with like 15, but it's just because over time I keep stacking and aerating the material. Like I said, this is the open chamber. This is where the chamber that all the food scraps get added. Something very interesting that we started to do with our designs of the bins is actually setting this brace here. This brace really helps with the bin staying up and nobody getting hit in the head. Very important, these lids are very heavy, and it's happened where people got hit in the head because they accidentally moved something, a pitchfork a certain way, and it releases whatever's holding it. So with all future designs, we're gonna make sure that all our 3 bins have a brace that can be held on. We also have these really cool posts that actually can be put in if you need a little more support on the bin. There's incisions that are made, so the bin kind of holds in. There you go. Actually just had some food scraps given to us by one of our neighbors, and that's what you see there, some of the apples. So the second chamber is very much cooking. It's a very much phase that's already hot and going. And that's why we say it's cooking. You never want to cross-contaminate. You never want to add too much of something when it's already been cooking. And this kind of wants to stay within itself. What we regularly do every week is we take everything out, we aerate, we mix it in, and we relayer inside this bin, and we hydrate. Very important is to hydrate and make sure that pile is nice and moist so the activity of the compost can stay active. Key is aerating at least once a week or every other week. You ideally want to keep the pile active so the composition can stay active and through the pile. This last chamber here is where we have our curing material, and at the moment it's actually empty because all our curing piles are behind you guys, chilling in the shade. It's easier for the compost to hang out in the shade, it dries out less, and the microbes can continue the decomposition process through the curing process. So this bin can fill up if we have our regular people dropping off, which is our partner compostable, and can fill up in one trip. If the community members, which is a co-op, which is the site, what this site is, this is a co-op site where co-op members can come and drop off from the community. There's actually trash cans outside filled with sawdust and empty trash can where they can layer their material. So as long as they bring material, as fast as they do that, this is as fast as it's gonna fill up. So I estimate maybe a month that it takes to fill up to what it is right now. And the process that continues usually takes about 3 months to be end result, which is the product behind you. And this here, once it's in the curing phase, it still has a month and a half to stabilize those temperatures because it's still 100, over 100, and once is under 100, you can start using that compost.
Are the trash cans like locked or out in the street?
Trash cans are locked with a combo. The way that we have co-op members join is we ask them to email us at join LA Compost, and then that way we can have give them instructions, give them the code, and the do's and the don'ts that you shouldn't be adding to your compost. Very important because there's a little bit of confusion on what you can compost. You know, people kind of sometimes make assumptions, so sometimes we get a whole turkey if we don't tell people we don't take meats or dairies or breads. So it's educational part as well. That's why we ask people to make sure that they email us and they get that information from us before they drop off. Anybody else?
You said no bread?
We don't recommend it just because I've had people get excited and they'll literally bring a loaf of sourdough bread that's still good, just dump it in the pile. And also a large amount of the bread, the bacteria kind of unbalances the compost. You never want to have a ratio of like 20 pounds of bread to what you're including. Of course, if you have a large pile, you can definitely cook breads, meats, and dairies, but I always recommend that when you are a more experienced composter, just so you feel more comfortable with what's happening. I personally can tell you that I've composted many carcasses, and it's fine. The bones are gone within a couple weeks, really fast. It's not hard. I personally breed rabbits, and when I butcher my rabbits, I compost the excess that I don't use. And that stuff really goes really quick and high in nutrients and minerals as well. Yeah.
So the key factor in that composting bread or not is just whether you can hold the temperature for
Ratios.
a certain time?
Ratios are a big thing. Make sure that you have enough diverse material that you can include the bread. You can't just decompose 20 pounds of bread within itself. It just takes forever. It's not gonna happen. I've attempted to decompose about 1,000 pounds of onions with pines. It just doesn't happen. It just doesn't happen. You have to introduce diverse ingredients for it to actually break down.
Basically what we do is we feed 5 days a week, we harvest on the 6th day, and we rest on the 7th day and give the worms an opportunity to eat any of the food or processed material which they didn't have an opportunity, say it was too hot, too dry, too wet, too whatever for the rest of the week. And this can make 2 gallons of vermicompost, or actually poop, worm poop, in a week, and up to 10 gallons a month. But if you have and support a population of 100 pounds of worms, so if you've got really your full population in here, it could be eating, and you're making smoothies, and you're freezing your material, you can get this bin to process 100 pounds a day, not a week. But that is after 6 months of building up your worm population. We only start with 30 pounds because they procreate so quickly. And really quick difference, the stuff on the top is food waste with coconut coir. The stuff in the middle is vermicompost. That's where it's half decomposed food and worm poop. The stuff on the bottom is 100% castings. This is 100% poop. So if someone's trying to sell you vermicompost, do know that it's usually pre-processed materials mixed with worm castings. It's not full castings. So you need to look for castings or poop, those 2 words, and then you're gonna get the full benefit out of it. And after the worms eat it, this is HDP, 100% post-consumer recycled plastic and recyclable, but it doesn't have any friction or static on it. So as that material gets thicker and more like gel-like, it will slide down towards the bottom of the machine. And then what we're gonna do is go ahead and freewheel one side of the hand winches and engage the other. And the concept that's happening here is we have a bar, a really thin bar, that is in a harvesting track system, so it can't. It's attached to 2 cables and 2 hand winches. We're gonna freewheel one side and engage the other side. And then you just crank this little cheese slicer back and forth. And anybody that wants to crank, Ariana, go for it. Anybody that wants to watch, look under the bin. Sure, of course. And so, so you're processing about 100 pounds of material a week, and you're getting a harvest of 2 gallons a week. So it could be 10 gallons a month, which sounds like so little compared to a big windrow or a compost pile. But the thing is that you can sell a quart of castings for 20 bucks because they are so potent and gardeners swear by them. And they can make worm tea and actually use a quart to maybe fertilize an entire 1/4 acre of land. So the pound per price, but the bang per buck is really where the value is in vermicomposting.
You said that these come in different sizes, like
Yeah, because they're modular, you can build them in any dimensions you want. We've built them as small as 1 foot wide and 15 feet long to fit under a staircase back in a Boys and Girls Club. We've built them 4 feet wide and 8 feet long for needing a certain processing capacity but not having the length space. But this is our general model for community garden size, school, education. It's 5 feet long, 2.5 feet wide. But then we do work in an on-farm application where we've built them up to 20 feet long. But you can, like I said, this is not patentable. This is a very DIY. You can very much build these yourselves. I'm not sitting here trying to give a business pitch at all. There's just not a lot of people out there that are DIY or community gardeners that have the time to find all of the materials. So that's why we do it. It's like the only thing that's holding you back is that you don't have a compost bin. Here, let us build you a compost bin and make it really efficient, easy, clean. This meets most city regulations because it's a locked bin. So it's a locked waste receptacle. People can't get into it after hours. It's off the ground and it's in vessel and it causes no wastewater. So you can literally put these in alleyways and the city won't say anything. So it's more, that's why we went with this design, is to help people who want to manage their own waste on site get through urban regulations and local zoning and planning, which is just be so hard when you start talking about putting compost piles on the ground.
Awesome. So we got a couple more videos coming up before our Q&A break. Next up, we got, let's see, so we got Lloyd Barker, and he's going to be presenting vermicomposting.
So we actually have a video on YouTube that is Lloyd's video, but he has mentioned on numerous occasions to me that this is an old video. So we're still going to play it, but then Lloyd, we're going to give you a chance to speak your piece about it. So we're going to play this video real quick first.
I love worms. Worms are great. When people mention worms, they're usually talking about them either comically or derogatorily or some way in which that they're being undervalued. The local worm guy is owned and operated by my wife Stacy and I, and we have our farm on my property in Philbrook where we raise our worms and have our worm ranch. Being a small business owner in Humboldt County is something that I'm really proud of. We provide worms year-round, all around Humboldt County, compostable material diversion services for local businesses, and vermicompost for use in home or commercial gardening. Local worm guy also composts for Humboldt State University. We receive a load of compostable food waste from the cafeteria and other on-campus locations here at our farm, and we turn it into worm food. The application of vermiculture has a lot of potential in the world to solve problems that are specifically tailored to what the worm is able to do. They're such a small creature. The tiniest worm can eat its own weight or even twice its own weight in food every day, which means that you get several hundred pounds of worms together, and all of a sudden you've got a really hungry machine that's going to process and eat a lot of organic compostable material. And they do it 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Worms are able to eat a lot of what we would consider trash. Trash now is a really broad category, but worms are able to process anything that's made out of food, anything that's made out of paper, or carbon or wood, or anything basically that would break down if you were to otherwise not put it in a landfill and throw it away as trash. When a worm eats something and it goes through its body and becomes casting or poop, then the plants that encounter that material are able to use those nutrients to grow healthy, awesome food or flowers. Worms are what we call hermaphroditic. They are both male and female, which means they are able to reproduce, but it takes two worms to reproduce. I started this business because I was concerned about the environment and wanted to find a way that I could make a difference in the community, make a difference on the planet, so that we could actually see material that would otherwise be wasted and make it into something that's good and usable and has value, not just for us as individuals, but for us as a society. And we're finding new ways every day to compost and collect material for people in Humboldt County and provide them a service that they really want in order to feel good about their own impact on the environment. If you see worms, just remember that they are really important and they are doing something that nothing else on the planet does quite as well or in quite the same way.
Thank you so much, Lloyd. I thought it was a fantastic video, even if you feel that it's a little outdated.
Well, I still have that same hat.
Oh, we should have had you find it for the webinar.
I know where it is. But yeah, I know just a lot of the equipment's changed, the methods have changed. But yeah, I mean, it's still accurate. Yeah.
Well, we have Lloyd here in person. If anyone would like to ask him some questions about worms.
Yes, or curbside compost pickup or any of that stuff. And I'm happy to wait for the Q&A if you guys want to play another video or however you want to do it. But yeah, I am here. I am always happy to talk about what we're doing. We do it. I still, that video is about 5 years old, but it still do the same thing every day, all day. So.
All right, it looks like Prema has raised her hand. Hang on one second, Prema. I am going to let you just ask a question directly. Let's see here. Where are you? For some reason, I don't see you. Ah, there we go. Go ahead, Prema.
Okay, I unmuted myself. Hi, Lloyd. I'm in Palm Springs, and I'm a fan of worms as well because that's how we used to fish as kids.
Awesome.
What do you think about, I attended the vermicomposting conference in North Carolina State University, and we talked a lot about containing the worms because if they're non-native to your environment, don't leave them in the garden or anything, contain them in containers. So do you have any take on that? I mean, out here, yes, it's a desert sand. Maybe we can find some worms somewhere, but I don't think red wigglers or night crawlers are native here. So I always tell people, hey, if you're using earthworms, please don't put them in the garden directly. Please put it in a container because we have this jumping worm infestation in California right now. So can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. So the jumping worm, I'll get around to that. As far as native worms go, from what I understand, North America really never had worms or had worms, but they were taken out by the most recent ice age that we had, and they were all imported subsequently to that. That's something I've read in books. I don't know exactly the veracity of that, but what I've always considered is that there is no non-native worm and there's no native worm, especially in North America. Again, if that common history is believed, then all of the worms have basically been brought by migration and usually human introduction. So that being said, particularly in like a desert environment, I would say most species of worms wouldn't survive very well in the sand, especially the ones that we're talking about that are doing composting and the kind of work that we're talking about. I wouldn't imagine, I mean, I have worms that go 10 feet in the wrong direction and they shrivel and die. So I wouldn't really suspect that they would be able to set up an invasive colony in an area like that. That being said, I would definitely look at the Indian blue worm or the excavatus species. They're a really good worm species that does really well in arid climates, and they're used a lot in the south of the world. But yeah, and then as far as the jumping worm, I'm hoping that there are enough predators around here that would see a snake-like worm living in the upper levels of the troposphere, that they would see that as an easy meal. And I'm hoping that they don't take too much of a hold, at least in the Pacific Northwest. And I'm hoping that as their population increases, we'll see more predation on them. So yeah, so I hope that answers your questions.
Yeah, it did. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Awesome. We have another question, or several questions from David. And there's also a question in the chat. So Mari, Lloyd, what kind of worms do you use? Red wigglers?
So yeah, we use Encena fetida and Encena hortensis. They're both the red, what are called red wigglers. Red wiggler can apply to either of those, and sometimes other worm species. So yeah, the Encena hortensis and Encena fetida are the two that we use. I've actually been going more towards the hortensis, which are commonly called the European nightcrawler. They seem to do really well in our climate. I'm in the Pacific Northwest on the coast in Humboldt County. So, you know, we have very temperate, usually somewhat cold, always wet kind of conditions. They do really well here. They're really hardy. They're a lot bigger than the red, than the Eisenia fetida, which are the, you know, what a lot of people call red wigglers. And so, yeah, so we use both, but for the most part, the Encena hortensis do the best for us. Actually, I really like the Perionyx excavatus, the blue worm. They do really well. We have a chicken coop and bedding and stuff, and they actually really like the hot compost a lot more than the other ones do. So I find a use for a lot of the different species in different applications, but yeah, for the main of what we're doing. And I should say that another caveat to that as well, we do pre-compost everything. So we're not directly feeding like Courtney was doing in her worm bin. We're not actually feeding a slurry or any kind of mix like that. We pre-compost everything and then feed it to the worms. So in that sense, our feedstock is a lot more forgiving. But yeah, but that being said, still after that process occurs, it's the Encena hortensis that we use for the most part.
Awesome, thank you. And yeah, that's also a great consideration in the beginning of your composting journey, is if you feel like you have some piles that just aren't doing what you want them to do and you happen to have some worms around, that's a great way to use some compost that maybe you're not happy with. You can use it as worm food. So we have one more question, and then I think maybe we can move on to our next video, which is also worms, just on a slightly different scale. So David had a couple questions. He's asking, how has the operation evolved over time? What strikes you as outdated? Lessons learned or wisdom to offer? Thanks for your time.
Cool. Thanks, David. Wow, how it's grown over time. I mean, we started in buckets and bins, and now we're using tractors and acres. So quite a big evolution over time. I still bust out the pitchfork when I need to, but yeah, the tractor's the go-to these days. So yeah, I'm fortunate for that volume. And then I also kind of miss the days of just being dirty and sweaty with the pitchfork all day. But yeah, we're definitely getting a lot more done with the bigger tools. And then yeah, I'd say things like just the equipment's changed. You know, when I look at the video, I look at the piles and stuff, and I don't know, I think I can build a better pile these days. You know, there's certain things that I look at, I'm like, I could do that a little bit better. We have a different sorting system now. So before, where we were hand feeding the trommel to get the casting sorted, which was a great system, worked well for years. Nothing wrong with it. But now we have a machine where I can feed it with the tractor, so we can get a lot more done at one time. So yeah, so I guess that's sort of the evolution, and also just thinking, wow, some of that labor, really the mechanization of it changes it a lot. So yeah, that's another reason I love getting back to the community roots, because yeah, we all have to start out somewhere, and if you have a pitchfork and a will and a way, go for it. You'll get there.
Mhm. All right, maybe one more quick question. Ahmad has asked, what would you recommend for someone who wants to start with a home bin system? I think a lot of people ask this question, so.
Yeah, and we still sell worms, every week to people who are doing the same thing. So what I would say is try and first thing you have to do is assess your environment, which a lot of people have talked about. Figure out where it's going to go, what kind of volume you're going to try and feed it, and then that will determine your space and what kind of materials you're going to need, what kind of bin you're going to want to use. Is it going to be outside? Is it going to be in your garage? Is it going to be under your sink? And that'll determine what sort of materials you're going to use. Go to YouTube, start Googling people who have worm bins who are doing the same thing, and look at what they say. What are their successes? What are their failures? Make a plan, get your materials. Maybe you have something in the backyard you're going to use. And then and be kind to yourself. It's a learning process. You may fail completely the first few times you try, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't keep trying. And also try and expand your space. So I tell people, if you're gonna, like, let's say you have a bin, do 2 bins at the same time, put them one next to the other. So the likelihood that both of the bins are going to die is a lot lower than one bin suffering and the other bin succeeding. So try and build in some redundancies for yourself, and yeah, don't feed too much. Lots of carbon.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you guys. Appreciate your time.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Lloyd.
Awesome.
Yeah. So next up, we've got Sierra Worm Farm, and Diane is also here and available. So if people have questions for her, we can do that as well. So, all right, let's get on to the video.
Hello, my name is Diane Goswick, and I'm owner and operator of Sierra Worm Farm. And today I'm going to talk a little bit how we use compost here at Sierra Worm Farm. We take composting very serious here at Sierra Worm Farm, in that through composting, heating our feedstock up to 131 degrees, we comply with CDFA, California Department of Food and Ag, and we feel very good about the product that we sell to our customers. We know it's disease pathogen free, so our composting here is something we take very seriously. Okay, I'm going to talk a little bit about the process that we go through here at Sierra Worm Farm to compost our feedstock. The first process is we go over to a local dairy, and they fill up our truck and trailer with dairy solids, and we bring those back and put them into a composting bay. This composting bay, we have access to adding air. If the feedstock starts getting too warm, we can add more air. We bring it in, we're checking moisture and of course temperatures. And once that temperature gets to 131 degrees for 3 days straight, we then go ahead and turn the feedstock. So it does not, we're not wanting to get much higher than 140 if possible. And so we're monitoring the temperatures, and then we're wanting the temperature to peak and then start to come down. So we want to feed the worms in the flow through bins. We really want that compost feedstock to be ambient temperature. So after it gets to ambient temperature, we then take the feedstock into the barn and feed the flow through bins. Once a week, we run a cutter bar across the bottom of each bin, which takes about an inch of vermicompost out of the bin. It hits the concrete floor. We then rake that vermicompost up or out, and then run that vermicompost through a trommel. So we have a very uniform, fresh, awesome looking product that is just so beneficial for any and all plants. People use it for planting, as well as, of course, making tea to either spray their plants or to put into their irrigation systems for bigger commercial usage. So that's how we bring feedstock in, compost it, and then use it to make vermicompost.
Excellent. So I think we have some time to actually ask Diane any questions too. So if anyone has questions about her processing techniques or any at all about her vermicomposting, now is the time.
Let me find Diane here really quickly so she can. Oh, is Diane still here? Yeah, there we go. All right, Diane, you are in control. We have a question here in the webinar chat for Diane. And it's, do you only use milk solids? Oh, hi, there you are. Oh, we've lost you again.
Hello?
There we go. Hello.
Okay, it keeps muting and then unmuting me. You can hear me?
We can hear you.
Perfect, perfect. It's not milk solids, but dairy solids. It's a manure from the dairy that goes through a sifting process. If
All
that
right, Lloyd.
yeah.
Lloyd, I see you have your hand raised.
Yeah, I'm curious. Do you have to adjust for the pH? I see you're catching it on the back end of the thermophilic, and then also, do you get, because that'll often make it acidic. And then, do you use any carbon additions when you feed?
Yes. Okay. First, for your pH, we've been lucky. The pH has remained around neutral. It comes in, and I mix in. I have a biodynamic spray, the Pfeiffer compost spray. I spray on the manure. As well as I mix in, when I first bring it in, I mix in some wood wood particles with it as well for that fungal. I want the fungal, of course, to start growing in it. So yeah, it's dairy manure. We can feed just straight dairy manure, composted dairy manure, but I like to add that fifer for some extra microbes as well as the wood chips.
And that's before it does the hot compost.
Yes, yes, I want those wood chips to heat up with that manure. Yes.
Awesome. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much. Do we have any more questions while we have Diane here live?
I have another question. Have you experimented with other food stocks?
We were doing windrows and we were bringing in from a restaurant. We were working with trying to compost food scraps into the manure, and we ended up just having a whole array of different animals coming to visit us, and ants, all kinds of different things. So no, I have not gone back to that. The dairy manure with the wood chips and the spray, and then of course, as you know, with the worms, running that through their wonderful digestive system, the vermicompost is looking pretty good. I'm pleased with it, but always open to keep that going. Keep improving the biology of the vermicompost.
So that's great. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
I appreciate that we've heard that several times now today, is the presence of critters when we are composting, and they are ever present, and given the opportunity, they like to eat the food that we waste. So I love that this keeps coming up, and we were just talking about it today, and we intend to have lots of exciting new information about ways that people can handle those issues moving forward, because depending on where you live, you get some very unique critters.
Yes. Yes.
All right. Do we have any more questions before we move on to what I believe is our final video for the night?
I have one more question. I'm sorry.
Okay.
I'm very interested
don't
to
be
talk to
sorry.
another worm farmer.
Yeah, sure.
So do you do individual bins? Do you have like a larger system, or how are you keeping your worms?
Right now, I just have two 16-foot by 5-foot wide flow through bins.
Okay,
So
awesome.
I'm not huge by any means, kind of a boutique, especially for in the Central Valley, San Joaquin Valley. I just have the two 16 by 5-foot bins.
Awesome. And you're able to feed, what's your throughput on that, if you don't mind?
About 3.5 yards per month of actual vermicompost. Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, or not what you yield, but like what are you able to put through the top, basically, and what's your square footage on that?
Able to put through. Okay, so there's 80 square feet per bin. I'm feeding 5 times 10, 50 gallons times 50 times 2 is 100 gallons.
Don't let me put you on the spot or anything.
Yeah. Math, my favorite. 100, about 400 gallons per week, if that makes, yeah.
Yeah. So
So
yeah, what is like
about
85 gallon buckets or something. What is that in 5 gallon buckets?
Well, I'm doing 10-gallon buckets because I'm the
Oh,
one
okay.
on the video. I'm the one lifting it.
Oh, wow.
And that would be such an awesome to be able to do that with a tractor. That would just be really cool. But right now, feeding by hand seems to work the best, just to get it spread evenly. But yeah, I had some friends and they were like, no, we should feed every other day. And I was really trying to pump the feedstock through, and well, if those worms don't get it all eaten, with a flow through bin, you can get into some serious wrecks. You definitely want them to eat and get that really, pool table effect on the top, and then feed again, not just start plugging it, pumping it in there. You want to just make sure they're keeping up eating what you're putting in there.
Yeah. I usually say like at least 50%, but then somewhere in the 70 to 80% is really what you want to do before you feed again. Would you agree?
Yes, especially with the flow through bins. And in the summer, you definitely want that feedstock ambient. I've pushed it a little harder in the winter when it's so much cooler, and boy, real quick, your bins can heat up, and
sure,
we do not want that.
And you broadcast over the entire surface, or do you leave some open?
I broadcast over the entire, if I'm at ambient, if my feedstock is at ambient, I'll really try to spread that throughout the whole bin.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I guess with the flow through, you have the open bottom, so you always have a little bit more off gassing and stuff like that.
Right. Yeah. Most of the worms do stay at the very top, but some will ride through and go through the bottom. So we're sorting out worms along as we're sifting the vermicompost as well.
Well, it looks like a beautiful product. It seems like you're doing great. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
All right, we have two more quick questions in the chat. And I think we've got enough time because we have just one video remaining. Yeah, so David in the chat is curious how the nutrient readings come out making worm castings just with manure, as it seems his experience has been with food scraps, and he's curious to see how they vary.
The nutrient, like NPK?
I'm imagining that's what he's talking about, yes.
I don't, I don't even test the NPK on it. It's like 001 or I'm looking for the biology. I'm wanting to have as much diversity in microbes as possible in the vermicompost that comes out. If that answers your question. I mean, diversity, the more diversity I could get into my feedstock, the better off I would be. Right now, manure and the wood chips and the Pfeiffer spray are doing pretty well. I may have another person join the farm here that's studying with Dr. Laningham, and then between the two of us, I'm just a one-person operation. Right now, my ingredients are about all I can handle at the moment, but I would totally love to enhance the diversity of the feedstock, for sure. So does that answer your question? I'm sorry, I'm not reading any of this. I probably should be, huh?
Oh, no worries.
Okay.
I've got you covered.
Thank you. Multitasking on computers is not my forte.
No
so what's the
worries.
next question?
David said, that's great. Thank you.
Okay.
We had another question that said, Diane, I think you are more in my neck of the state. What kind of worms do you prefer?
I right now am only using the red wrigglers, the Acinetida. They just they tolerate the heat here. We do get up to about 110. We can get up to 115. They're a durable little worker. They love to eat, and of course they love to poop. And they just, for me in my area, they just I guess that's all I've ever tried. So maybe I should be like Lloyd and go out and try some different ones. But the Acinetida have been champions for me. So,
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Do you sell worms? I'm just gonna jump in real quick.
I do.
Awesome. What do you sell per pound? I'm at $40 a pound right now for worms.
You're at what?
40 a pound plus tax.
That's exactly where I am.
Okay, awesome. Cool.
Yeah, thanks for your candid.
Oh, absolutely. Hey, I won't ask without telling. I'll tell you.
Cool. That's the joy of worm farmers, I've found. People just are really willing to share. It's very nice. It's a great community to be a part of. I've found that's been my experience.
I definitely agree. Something about I don't know, maybe they show the power of community.
Yes. Something about working those eight days a week, I think, maybe.
Exactly. They just live their perfect life, and that's all we need them to do.
That's right.
Awesome. Well, thank you both so much for coming in and talking to us about worms. I know we started generating a lot of questions in our first webinar videos, so I'm glad we had some folks who could actually come here and talk live to us today. So I think we're going to move on to our next round of videos. Again, thank you so much, Diane and Lloyd, for coming and chatting with us tonight.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely, our pleasure.
I actually wanted to make a quick comment on because we were talking about critters, and initially I remember Keisha was talking about how her static piles were attracting critters, and then Diane's talking about critters. And so I just kind of wanted to talk about, I actually came up with an interesting, so we started doing in a community garden where we were doing infiltration swale pathways. So what that kind of looks like is wherever we had a pathway in our garden, especially between our food forest or our fruit trees, we were digging these 1 to 2 foot diameter ditches essentially that were roughly 2 foot deep. And we were actually filling them about 1 foot with food scraps. And then we were then adding a little bit of biochar we made. We were then topping that off with wood chips, and then adding some like compost teas and extracts to kind of expedite the process. But having it buried so low into the ground kind of allowed for like a static composting in the ground to take place, which was kind of cool. And then it also was turning our pathway into a composting system and a groundwater recharge system that our trees greatly appreciated, and we had no critters. So that was kind of a really cool win. Again, it was one instance, can't guarantee it'll work every single time, but I just wanted to share that.
Awesome.
Thank you
That's
so
really
much
cool.
for that, Daniel.
Were those static, Daniel, or so you meant them to just stay there, or did you recharge them or remove material, add new material?
Yeah, so it's completely static. After the fact though, we never topped off with more food scraps. So it's kind of like a one-time deal with the food scraps. We're up to the foot, and then after that, we only add wood chips because every year it was slumping because the material's breaking down. And so in that ditch kind of area in the pathway, you would see it slump anywhere from like 2 to 5, maybe 6 inches if it was a good year. And so then we would chop it off with wood chips because at 6 inches, it really wasn't enough depth to start adding food without potentially pulling critters into the garden. So it was kind of a one and done, but it was a cool way to utilize, because we didn't have very much space in our garden. We were running out of like places to compost, and I was like, why don't we do it in the ground? We need to, we have a dryland environment. It was just dirt everywhere and pretty much no water out there. And so I was like, let's do a multifaceted approach. We already have a pathway. Let's turn it into a composting system / a groundwater recharge system. So it was pretty cool.
Awesome.
Okay,
Great.
so next up, we've got 1 to 2 videos on ASP, or aerated static piles. So take it away again, Janelle.
Will do.
My name's Randy Pistachio. I am the Director of Farm Stewardship here at Long's Gardens, where we grow about 1,000 different varieties of iris. We also cover crop all of our pastures for a goat dairy run by Growing Gardens. The composter was needed as a way to have a central location to deposit all of the wasted goat food, alfalfa, hay, bedding, sawdust, as well as all their manure, because we're really good at keeping our goat pens clean. So we needed a central location to deposit that and hopefully accelerate its breakdown. The composter started as just a simple 3-bay system that we would just turn as needed. And then EcoCycle came to us with the proposition to maybe accelerate the process even more. And what that entails is solidifying the sides with plywood, putting in those channels that we cover in the front, and then there is piping with holes drilled into it down below the piles that will actually pump air up and through to keep it aerated. So instead of turning the pile once a week or so, we only turn the pile when we feel like it's done. So down here in the base of 2 of these bays, there are 3 perforated pipes. The perforations are actually on the bottom, so that the air comes out the bottom and then flows up through, like in that motion. And the air is piped in through a main distribution pipe that runs along the back. And then all of the pipes are covered with a looser wood chip material, so a little more permeable to let that airflow come back up through the pile. Got a blower unit kind of behind me here that will pump air through, and all of that is automatic. It's on a timer run by the solar system behind us.
Ramen that's healthy, wholesome, and jam-packed with life-sustaining protein. No, it's not magic.
So the fan turns on for 30 seconds every 30 minutes. And that seems to be a good balance of pushing enough air through without drying the pile out. Got a conduit that has the solar cables coming in, charging this portable generator. It can also be charged up with AC power as well. And then that is attached to the timer, which controls the fan cycle. And then this is just pretty much a bouncy castle blower attached with some rubber tubing into the PVC. And then in order to independently control each of our bays, since we have 2 of them, we've just got little tiny gate valves here so we can isolate one or the other. And that's what runs under each one of the bays and circulates the air up and through the pile. The batch that I'm going to make today is probably about the 14th batch that we'll put through the system. And some of those have been rolled into another bay to make another batch. We will take raw materials, anything from the goat pens, Some weeds will come from the farm. So we'll take all that raw material, put it into a storage bay. When we have enough material, we will build a layer about a foot deep in the bottom of the composter. We will soak it with water as evenly as possible. Sometimes we'll rake it around to make sure that it's really soaking through. And we'll do that on repeat, and we'll build the compost pretty much as high as we can. And then we'll cover up the front. So it's got 4 solid sides. Give it a last good soak. Layering is certainly very important. We have a very carbon heavy mixture here, and we do have some nitrogen, but it's good to have those ingredients, the carbon and the nitrogen, so your greens and browns mixed throughout the whole pile. More importantly though, the moisture needs to be layered properly, which is why we build sort of a foot at a time and make sure that gets soaked through. Whereas if you built the whole pile and tried to water it from the top, you would have a lot of pockets where it would be completely bone dry and you'd probably not really see much action at all. Once we build the initial pile, we actually don't water it at all. That might be something that we learn could keep things accelerating a little quicker. Again, it is where this bin is located, it's not the easiest to get water to. And we come out here once a day, check temperatures in 6 different locations, and make sure that things are heating up properly. So we'll do a 12-inch check and an 18-inch check at 3 different locations throughout the pile. So we get different readings of where it might be completely thermophilic, or maybe there's a pocket that's not actually fully active. And once it's gone thermophilic, so 4 days at 131 degrees or higher, we call it pretty much good, and we'll be a little less diligent about checking the temperatures, but we'll let it go down into more of a cure stage. And then pretty much when we need the space, we will turn it into a different bin and let it sit until we're ready for it again. The first cycle that a lot of this raw material goes through kind of brings it to about a 40 to 50% decomposition stage. You can certainly see the process has started. Again, with some of the cold pockets or dry pockets that might have formed during building the pile. There's some incomplete areas, but from raw material, 3 weeks, 40 to 50% finished. We might not put that on our fields. However, if we ran it through a second cycle and brought it more to like a 60 to 70% stage, we could spread it onto our pastures as is, which is what we were doing with raw material anyway. So this would speed up that process. So this pile, just like all the other piles, has been through one cycle, one thermophilic cycle. So definitely got up to 131 degrees for about 4 days. And you can see it's definitely working. It's actually still hot to my hands. So it was still working even long beyond after I stopped taking temperatures. There's still some raw material, but certainly a big difference from the raw material that we started with. And again, that was only about 2 weeks of this pile sitting there.
The method.
All right, so we had a different type of aerated static pile kind of built into a 3-bin system, which I very much like. I'm not going to play the rest of that video because he goes into just talking about their farm. So all right, well, should we watch our next video on aerated static piles? We were thinking we were just going to play one. And then I found another video which is a fellow who actually led a section of our field day during CCGS 1 at Cal Poly Pomona, Benny Erez. And it could be a little teaser for anybody who's coming to the Sacramento training retreat of the style of ASP that we're going to be building at the IRC property.
It looks like we got some thumbs up in the chat, so let's do it.
All right, so here's one more round of ASP for the evening.
Hi, everybody. We're now at Echo City Farms, about 15 minutes away from the center of the DC Center. And this is Dietrich, and my name is Benny Erez. I'm going to show you a little tip about making compost and how to make a pile that you don't have to turn as many times. By using a drain pipe that you can find anywhere with holes on one side. And this pipe you can find at Home Depot, you can find it anywhere, and this is about 10-foot pipe. And we're going to install this into our compost pile to allow air to come in this way and to aerate the pile. This is called a static aerated pile. It uses the heat of the pile to bring fresh air into the pile. And we'll lay about 2 pipes every week. We're going to cover them with some straw. As you can see, when we put the straw on top of these holes, since the straw has long stems and a lot of holes in them, it will allow air to go through these holes and will not block the air from going up into the pile itself.
Hey, you, stay out of my holes.
The tubes should be set up so that the holes are towards the top or going upward. Obviously, it makes more sense because that's where you want the aeration to take place. So if you set it the other way, it's not going to bring air into the pile. This way, it will bring air into the pile. And after we'll be done with a layer about this much, we can add our new food waste and whatever we want to do, actually with the right recipe. Maybe you'll have to turn this pile maybe once, maybe twice, and that's about it.
Hey, you, check out our other videos.
If you want to increase the aeration in your pile, you could use what we tried to do here. You could use a fan, and what we have done here, connected it to the pipes, and every so often, if we need to, we can push air into this pile just by plugging it into electricity. Oh! This is sleepy time for the compost, and by tomorrow or the next day, the new section that we just put in will be maybe 150, maybe 120, but hopefully in 3 months this whole pile will be completely done and we can put it into our growing system.
All right, so that is probably one of the simplest ways to set up an aerated static pile. And I actually absolutely love the guy who was leading that presentation. All right, well, I believe that is our last video for the evening.
So that means we got time for a little bit more Q&A if anyone has any questions about any of the topics or ASP systems.
All right, I'm checking the chat now. So that ASP system that they just set up is going to be, yes, Benny is absolutely a hootly. I 100% agree with you. Yeah, so I'm not seeing any questions in the chat, but we will be building an ASP at the Sacramento retreat coming up next weekend, and it'll be a little bit different than this one, but a pretty similar idea. So yes, Benny's before they added the blower would have been a passive aeration system. So they're not forcing air through the pile with a blower, they're just allowing more air penetration by creating that space on the bottom of the pile, because usually that is an interface with our composting that doesn't get very well aerated.
Hey, I wanted to jump in too, Janelle. I don't remember exactly what the name for it is, but there's an old method of composting where you dig a small trench in the ground and then basically mound over that trench with larger woody materials, cap that sort of tunnel, if you will, with looser material like straw and leaves, and then build your compost over that. And if you leave both ends open, you can get a good 20 plus feet out of a system like that. And it's a passive aeration. I don't know if you've probably seen that before.
Yeah, personally, I often add bulky materials to the bottoms of my piles, especially if they're just on dirt, because it helps lift it up off of the ground a little bit, particularly in the rainy season. That way the piles aren't sitting in puddles. I just make kind of a bed of branches and sticks and things like that. And that could be another way to just lift it off the ground and add some aeration to the bottom of the pile.
Nice. Yeah, and it makes it easier to get out of the mud too.
So Ahmad has asked any thoughts or ideas on small farm applications for ASPs. I mean, I think the first video was kind of a good example of maybe adapting a small scale compost system you might already have, like a 3-bin, to have some aeration tubes in it. Unfortunately, I don't know that we have ASP experts with us tonight, but if you are here, you are welcome to add to this as well. I would think in the 3-bin system would be great. Sometimes I add pipes like Benny was doing in that first example, just underneath piles when they're curing, so that they continue to get that aeration even after I've stopped actively turning them in their thermal phase. Yeah, but I know that in Sacramento, we will have some folks who would love to chat a little more in depth about these particular systems. We had another question here about, are both ends of the tubes open in the non-forced air system? I would say yes, just because if you're not forcing air, you want to allow as much air movement through those tubes as possible. So I would think it would probably be best to try to leave both ends of the tubes open to allow that to happen. And yes, as Lloyd was illustrating earlier too, you don't necessarily even need to have those PVC tubes to get aeration to the bottom of your piles. All right, another thing I will say, there's a style of piles that we did not show a video on, but that seems to be really growing in popularity. That's Johnson Su bioreactors, which are yet another version of a static pile, which just means that you're not turning that pile while it's breaking down for the main part of the breakdown. And they insert tubes vertically into those piles to allow for airflow through the pile. Usually there's several of them, and the pile is also set up on top of a pallet which has some screen laid on the top. So that way it's got aeration around 360, the entire outside of the pile. And then also there's some tubes poked in the middle to get some air into the center of that pile. And that's something you can do. It doesn't have to be a bioreactor. You can do that with just a regular windrow food scrap tile style system as well. All right, we have 2 minutes left. Are there burning questions from the audience for this evening?
I also included a link to a Johnson Soup bioreactor if anyone wants to learn how to build one in the chat.
And there was a quick question. Oh, are you want to field that one, Daniel?
Sure, that's not a problem. Yeah, so yeah, it definitely takes about a year. It's a slow process. It can take longer. Just really depends on what you put into it, and also how thorough you are with maintaining your moisture. That really helps for sure. And I've actually got away with not adding a pallet on the bottom. You can do it. The cylinder in the center, as long as you get your measurements correctly, you actually will get plenty of aeration from the center cylinder area as well as the external walls. But pallets can be helpful depending on environment, especially like, for instance, if you have like Bermuda grass or something, because Bermuda grass will just grow right up into the pile, and then you just have a bunch of Bermuda grass inside your compost, which is not fun. So maybe putting like a pallet down with like a weed block on top of it or something can help with that. So it has its ups and downs, really. It depends on your environment and your goals.
Yeah, and there was a follow-up question asking if they heat up, and typically Johnson Soup bioreactors do have a thermal phase shortly after building. It should heat up for a little while and then cools down, and the recommendation is to add worms after the thermal phase has cooled off. We'll have a whole bunch of folks at the retreats who are able to talk about Johnson Soup bioreactors, and of course you're free to reach out to us if you want some follow-up too. We've been doing some fun experiments with composting Scotch broom up in my area because it's a big problem. All right, we have reached 8 o'clock again.
Another day down. So
we made it.
So special thanks to everyone, first to Janelle and Courtney for providing technical support, as well as being our great, awesome co-hosts. Leticia Garcia for interpretation, the presenters for sharing their expertise, and of course, California Alliance for Community Compost, and Cal Recycle for making all of this possible. And of course, all you great participants, thank you so much. So I'll see you guys tomorrow for SoilPalooza Day 4.
Yes, thank you all so much for coming. This would not be possible without you, and definitely would not be nearly as exciting without you.
Talking to each other, that would not be fun.
We do enough of that already. All right, we have Leticia back. Thank you so much again for managing interpretation throughout this webinar series. I hope that that's felt.
I know that this is not my expertise, and I'm definitely trying. I've been still telling them, okay, what's next tomorrow, so I can look up the words. So I'm trying my best. So thank you for your patience. I truly appreciate it.
Oh, absolutely. We are all learning here, so no worries.
Exactly. So like, for example, with the worms, I didn't know how to say the types of worms. So what I commented to the folks in Spanish, if, wherever they are, to please put those, if they have questions, about the type of worms that you recommend, or Lloyd recommends, or Diane, to put that in there so that we can get that information to them. I didn't want to give them incorrect information. So I would rather that they write their question in, and then we can respond appropriately.
Perfect. Yeah, that sounds absolutely lovely. I'm pretty sure
Leticia,
everyone has
Can I
access.
ask you how to say composting worms in Spanish, please?
Composting is compostaje. Compostaje. Can you say that? Compostaje.
Compostaje.
Compostaje, correct. And worms is gusanos.
Gusanos.
Gusanos. So in Spanish, you would
gusanos.
So put it. You say the worms first. So gusanos de compostaje. Gusanos
de compostaje.
compostaje. You got it.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
You bet. I loved your video.
Thank you.